So hey there fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. So in the last video I put out, I showed the yo-yo mechanical reels with the speed hooks, and that was really just a piece of my small game kit. So in this video today I want to show you different components that exist to a lightweight small game kit that I normally have sitting in my bag. So I'll cut scenes here and I'll come back to the kit and we'll start to walk through it. So I've moved deeper into the woods where hopefully I'm in a bit more of a protected area. The winds are picking up pretty good right now, so I know that'll be affecting the microphone. But what I've done is I've taken a few of the items out of my small game trapping kit and kind of laid them out here, and I'll walk through each one and discuss their uses and functionality. So for the first one, this is the yo-yo mechanical reels with the speed hooks. I showed this in the previous video that I've released. So this is for fishing gear. So if you want a detailed breakdown of exactly how those work, I recommend that you watch the last video that I put out, and I go through those in full detail. When it comes to this item here, this is Conibear One Ten. So this is a small snapping trap that really is suitable to catch everything up to about the size of a small raccoon, you know, a possum, those types of things. But probably one of the most versatile traps that I own, and I'll probably do a more detailed video in the future on all the different configurations you can do with the Conibear. Like I say, I'll set it up and show in this video, but I'll just walk through everything and then I'll come back through and do details on each. So in this kit, I've got a snare kit where I've got a dozen snares. Some of them have, you'll see these little bent mechanisms here. Those are kind of locking snares, so once they set the noose, they don't want to loosen back off again. And I have 6 of those in here, and I have 6 non-locking snares that I would use more on squirrel poles and those types of things. So you might find in environments that you're in, there's nothing but small, tiny game. So I always think it's good to have a couple small mouse traps, even if you're catching them to use as bait to get larger animals. These are always handy to have. You know, if you take some of the edible nuts or berries that you have in the area, kind of mash them up, set them on here. Now they're great for catching tiny mice and those types of things, whereas normally a rat trap, which I normally have quite a few of these, the rat traps normally you'll catch squirrels, you know, Norwegian rats, the kind of larger rodents, if you will. The rat trap that I have here, I'll go through some of the modifications I've done to these, but these are more for squirrels and larger rats and those type of things. Then here I have a number 4 gig, the frog gig. These are primarily used to dispatch animals. You know, you'd put a wooden stick into the end and lash it on, and use it to catch frogs and those types of things. Gigs can be very handy to help dispatch small animals. You know, if you've got a squirrel or a rabbit that are hooked up and they're really finicky and fighting the snare or fighting whatever trap you've got them caught into and they're not quite dead yet, you know, you can easily help dispatch with these. But they're also excellent for taking down frog and those type of things. And then last but not least, I have a fishing net that I made, must be probably close to 15-20 years ago now. It's made out of a nylon parachute thread, so it's a really fine thread. Hopefully the camera's picking that up. I'll pull it out of the bag a bit and show you. But the individual threads on it are really tiny threads, but they're extremely strong. They're about 30-40 pound strength for each one of those threads. So this fishing net is more for catching, you know, fish closer to the size of trout and that type of thing. I'm not looking at catching salmon and those types of things. So like I say, in the previous video I did a detailed breakdown on the yo-yo mechanical reels and the speed hooks, so I'm not going to go through those now. If you want to know in detail about those, you can go and watch that video, and I'll show you the Conibear One Tens here and their basic functionality. So in essence, they're a spring-loaded body grip trap. So they've got a chain line that comes off on them that I've attached an additional piece of bank line, tarred bank line, and that way I can tie it off. Or potentially you can run a stick through and use that to set. But the way that these function, you've got these kind of ears that sit on here. So this spring is the actual main snap of the trap. So you squeeze those together with your hand and you kind of swing it opposite and then hold it with your hand, and you make sure you hold it good and tight. You don't want this thing clamping on you. You can easily break a finger with these types of traps. So, and then this dog, we want to turn around, and it's got little notches on it. I want to set those notches into the ears that are kind of sitting in the opening of the trap. So I'll set it out just to the middle setting. There's sensitivity variants that you can set with these to how sensitive you want the traps to be. I'll just put it on the middle one for a general example. I'll kind of move my hand out of the way. I don't want to get my hand caught in this. That's a key thing. So this trap is set now. If any animal passes through and triggers those ears that are sitting on the inside, it's going to trigger this trap. So you take this trap, you can either put it in shallow holes on the ground and use it as a leg trap, but you can also turn around, and I'll just use this as a simple example where, say this was a run that rabbits were passing through. I could turn around and set that there, put a stick in through here just to brace that trap, or I can simply just tie this trap off. But in order to trigger that, all it really does, I'll pick it up and show you now. Normally you'd put a bit of foliage around both sides to kind of force the animal to come through the opening. But when you trigger this trap, I'll just kind of show you up close of, you can see it broke that stick. So really what it would end up doing is just snapping on the animal's body and suffocating it. Normally it would kill it instantly, and if it doesn't, it would suffocate very quickly. You know, like I said, these are traps that are designed to catch anything the size of kind of a small raccoon and less. So they're very versatile traps. You can bait them to encourage the animals, you know, stick some bait on these ears, and you can modify it so that it covers the opening a little bit more just by bending those ears a little to kind of cover the opening that the animal would pass through. But you can either bait these or not. You know, it's more effective when you bait the trap for sure, but it's not critical with the Conibears, and that's one of the things I really like about them. So this Conibear is a 110. It weighs about a ½ pound each, so I can carry a couple of these in my bag without it becoming a major issue. You know, when you get up into the 220s and those types of things, those are really a little bit larger than this, but they weigh a substantial amount more, and the springs are far stronger on them. So normally you need an aid in order to press the springs together to set the traps. Whereas the beautiful part about the 110 Conibear is it's easily, my hands are easily strong enough to set that and hold it and control it without any other special tools when I'm out in the field. So like I say, I'll see if I can find a larger stick, because that one just shattered, and use that to trigger this thing. But these are probably one of the most effective traps I've ever seen in my life, really. So like I say, I'll grab a stick with a larger diameter here that won't snap as easy, and I'll show you that one more time of, so you can see it clamped down on this stick with substantial force. So the body of the animal, normally if it's small game that, you know, size of a small raccoon, that's just going to crush that animal. Now to release it, you know, that animal will be stuck in there. He's not going anywhere trying to fight to get out of it. And if he's still in the state where he's going to run with it, that's where you normally need to, like I say, tie these off or stick a stick through the spring, the opening of the spring, to kind of lock this trap, and that way you don't have an animal run off with it. But to get that animal out, you would have to dislodge the spring and kind of let it set. So like I say, those are Conibears. Any animal that's big enough to get its head into there is gonna die normally. You know, these are kill traps, body grip kill traps. You know, normally 90-95% of the time you come back and the animal will be fully dispatched on its own just from the way of these traps. But if it's not, potentially you've got your frog gig there to help you dispatch that animal, or your knife that you carry on you. I don't recommend normally using the knife. I think the frog gig is a safer way to go, because having the stick attached to the frog gig gives you some distance from the animal. You know, when an animal is close to death, they're going to want to fight for their life. So you're better off to kind of stay a distance from it and dispatch it than you are to try to get up close to it. You don't want to get rabies or some other disease, you know, getting bit by an animal that's on its last breath. But I'll move on to the next items here, yeah? So as the next part of the video, I'll show you my snare collection that I have. I've got a dozen of them, like I say, in this kit. They're homemade snares. They're nothing fancy. They're not store-bought or anything. I don't normally trust snares too much. To me, these are really short-term option. Normally, if you use a snare, you might get 1 or 2 uses out of it, and then the wire itself is shot. When the animals fight against the snares, if they don't get strangled and suffocated out right away, they'll fight and just tear at these cables. This is really a heavy-duty picture frame wire that I've used, where I've just you know, kind of sealed the connections to keep the wire taut. And then for the locking snares, like I said, I just used the little 90-degree piece here, where there's 2 little screw holes on both sides. One of them kind of locks in, and the other one kind of is just free for the snare itself. So the thinking really is the animal gets its body or head caught into the snare, and as it applies tension, that snare will lock now and doesn't want to come loose. And the more they fight, the more it just kind of clamps and locks down. And to get it loose, you got to kind of just pop it back off again. It's easily doable, but having the locking snares just makes it that the chances of having the snare dispatch the animal quicker, in my perspective, is far higher. So these would be good to use in, you know, rabbit runs and those types of things. Like I say, simple little homemade items. There's nothing complex about them. I just don't normally trust snares for any type of long-term survival. You know, Conibears and those types of things definitely have a longer lifespan for use before they, you know, rust out. Whereas, like I say, the wires of these snares, you know, when an animal is frantically pulling on that wire, they're going to trash these wires after 1 or 2 uses. You might get 3 or 4 tops, but normally snares aren't long-term solutions. And then, like I said, I've got 6 snares where these are simpler snares. Hopefully the camera's picking that up. Rather than having the little locking mechanism like I do on these snares, I've just got a loop where I've come back on the cable itself. Now these snares I would primarily use more for, there's things called squirrel poles, where you'll take a couple of these snares and you take a pole of wood, and you set it on a 45-degree angle against the side of a tree, and just have it that the one end sits on the ground and the other end's up against the tree. Squirrels are inherently lazy creatures. If they don't have to run straight up the tree, they won't. So by putting a 45-degree angle stick allows them to kind of shortcut getting up the trees. So you just kind of bend it into the shape where it's then going to sit on that pole about the head height of the squirrel, you know, and say about that big. And as the squirrel runs up the pole, it'll get its head caught, and then it'll hook and act as a snare does. And normally when you come back to your squirrel pole later on, you'll see the dead squirrels just dangling off of that pole. So I find the locking snares tend to be better for things like rabbit, whereas the squirrels, given that they're a smaller creature, you know, generally, given that they're a smaller creature, the non-locking snares normally would have a higher success rate of catching the squirrels on the squirrel poles. So I'll move on to the next item now. So for the next 2 things, the mice traps and the, you know, mouse trap and the rat trap, fairly self-explanatory. They're normally fairly familiar terrain to most people. Like I say, not much to say there. I'll just show you the modifications I've done to my rat trap, because the mouse trap is really good for if all it is really tiny game around you and you're just desperate for any type of protein, or you're eager to get the mice and voles and those types of things, you know, smaller creatures, and you're eager to get those for bait. But normally 9 times out of 10 I'd be moving up into a rat trap. So what I've done with these rat traps is I've drilled a hole into the rat trap where I've attached a piece of paracord that I can tie it off, and that way there's no chance of an animal, if it does get caught in this and doesn't perish, there's no chance of the animal running off with my trap. You know, one of the key things you want to do is kind of maintain your gear as you move through time, right? So this is a conventional rat trap. There's not much, you know, works as it normally would. I've done a few small modifications. Like I say, I drilled the holes into it to set it, and that way the animal can't run off with it. I've also turned around and painted this with an oil paint. I did this a few years ago to really help just weather resist the paint, or weather resist the rat trap itself. Now, the steel ones that are out there, I own a couple of those as well, but I don't like the softness of the body of the steel ones. You know, they last forever and da-da-da. I've got a couple in my bag. I really should have brought one of those, but you know, to show you one rat trap, you show them all, kind of thing. But what I've done is made a slight modification here, where I've set in a screw that kind of locks a piece of metal in behind, and I lifted up the springs and gave them just a little bit more tension to these springs, and that way when they snap, it gives a little bit more force on the snap. There is other modifications you can do to these rat traps. I plan on doing them probably as I move forward in time, where you put small nails right where the piece comes down. You put small nails here. I'll just kind of open it up and hold it. If you put small nails sticking out the top here, as the animal has it that their head gets snapped on, their head is driven into small spikes to help dispatch the animal faster. You know, it's all about trying to kill these animals. You know, if you're going to kill them and eat them, it's all about trying to kill these animals as quickly as possible and dispatching them as, you know, as fast as you can. But like I say, I've got normally at least 4 to 6 of these that sit in my bag. If I find rat traps, you know, you'd think it's such a common thing, but when you're out in the wilderness, having a couple of these rat traps can ensure that you have a protein supply on a regular basis, you know, without getting into any type of complex trapping methods. As long as you have, you know, potentially a little bit of peanut butter if you've got it in your stock with you, or you know, you've got some natural edibles that the animals in the area like, you know, you can easily use these to catch small creatures. That'll definitely help give you a fat and protein boost to your survival situation. Okay, so the next item in the Congo line is the frog gig itself. So you see that this is a number 4X. So this is really one of the larger frog gigs you can get. Now, the area I'm in, the frogs are quite large, and you know, the other animals that potentially I would use this to help dispatch the animal, this is kind of the suitable size for the terrain I'm in. But you can get these in a varied number degree, and I'll kind of give a close-up of that just for people that want to know the details of it. B&M Spears that supplied this, and you can see on these ends, not only do they have nice little sharp points onto them, there's also a secondary little hook onto them. Hopefully the camera's picking that up okay. But it's really, once it sets into the animal, it doesn't want to come back out easily. You know, it's one of those things where these little barbs just help hold on to the bodies. But you know, when it comes to taking down frogs and those types of things, it's as simple as just spearing the animal, you know, and the animal's done. And then, you know, the same kind of concept that exists with anything really that's going to get into these points. But like I say, you can get these in a variety of different sizes, so you know, it really be conscious of the size of the animals that are in the environment you're in to what size a gig you would need. And then, like I say, the 4X in the terrain I'm in is the most suitable one, but they're definitely worth looking into. And they're good to have, you know, if you've got one of these strapped onto a stick with a bit of paracord or some bank line and that type of thing, if you're walking around foraging and those types of things, and you come across a frog or you come across any small creature that's, you know, within arm's reach, you know, you can take those animals very easily. So these are definitely handy things to have for, you know, kind of secondary hunting when you're just roaming around the woods and you stumble upon things. I couldn't tell you how many times that I've come across frogs and I've come across lizards and other things that you know, the lizards, normally this would be a little large for them, but the frogs in the terrain I'm in, these will easily take down those frogs. But you know, it's just one of those things to have with you when you're out in the bush. Of, you know, like I say, especially when you're foraging, you can come across incidental protein and fat supplies that normally you wouldn't harvest off any other type of trap. You know, it's hard to catch frogs without just taking them down with a gig. But there's not much more to say about the gigs. They're pretty self-explanatory, you know, little spears, if you will. But I'll move on to the next item, yeah? So there really isn't a huge pile to say about, you know, the fishnets. I don't really want to pull this fully out because it's tucked in there pretty good, but it's just a standard fishnet that I made, let's say probably 15-20 years ago, where each one of the spacings, just to kind of give you an idea, hopefully the camera's getting this without having to pull everything out, each one of the spacings is about the size of 4 fingers or so in its diameter, you know. And this overall net, I made this to be quite large. It's a dual purpose net. The reason why I went with these really fine materials and made this myself was, not only can you use a net for in the water fishing, as you've probably seen lots in the past, you can actually put these up in the evenings once the sun's gone down in openings between trees. And this material is fine enough where if you put it up in flyways where birds fly through, potentially you can use these nets to catch birds as well as to catch fish. And like I say, that was one of the key reasons why I went with this kind of neutral colored, you know, light brown colored, really fine thread, so it becomes very difficult for the birds to see that. You know, you have to put up those fly nets. You have to put them up at nighttime, because if the birds see you put them up, they'll evade them, and you really can't leave them up for long periods of time. But potentially you can use this to take down some, you know, birds as well as fish. And like I say, this net's quite large. I think, if I remember correctly, it must be probably about 10 foot in height and close to 15-20 foot in width. It really is quite a large fish net, you know. So like I said, it's just not worth pulling out because nets are kind of common thing to see, you know. Having these in my kit really adds to the survivability if you end up in an emergency situation where you're lost and, you know, you're having to be in a survival situation. You know, these types of tools can make it far easier for you to turn around and sustain yourself for an extended period of time until you either come back out and find civilization yourself, or somebody comes and gets you. You know, it's good to know and have the skill set to be able to make primitive traps and those types of things, which I do. I know how to do that fairly extensively, but those take time, you know, they take energy. When you're out in the wilderness, if you're harvesting off all these materials to make those traps out of, it's labor intensive and time intensive. You know, you really, with primitive traps, you normally need to have far more of them to achieve the same level of effectiveness as you would off of, say, a Conibear One Ten, which in my perspective, everybody should have these in their kit. But I'll cut the video here, and yeah, it gives you a flavor of my small game trapping kit. I don't normally use these very often. They really are in my bag for more of, if I'm in really remote locations and I end up getting myself lost, I want to make sure that I'm able to harvest off meat to sustain myself. So hey there, fellow YouTubers. Thanks for tuning in to another one of my bushcraft related videos. You know, it's unfortunate I haven't been able to get out into the field and do the full-length videos. I know there's people on my channel that like to watch those, you know, more than these short snippets. But I've got a group of people that like the short snippets, and I've got a group of people that like the longer videos. So I'll try to find a balance of both. But either way, it's been really hectic in my life and busy, so I just haven't had a lot of time to get out into the field to do one of these full-length videos. But hopefully I will in the near future. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't seen all the things that are in it, hopefully you got something new out of it that potentially would increase your survivability if you were ever in an emergency situation in the wilderness. Thanks for watching. Cheers.